Hello everybody and welcome to my second part of my complete Kaladesh set review. I am Evan Irwin and this is every blue card in Kaladesh. The first is either Meltdown, a blue and a generic mana for a uncommon aura enchantment that has flash, enchant creature or vehicle. When either Meltdown enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters, and the enchanted permanent gets -4/-0. So this is a very blue way of handling problems. Blue often shrinks them down, shrinks their power, but kind of lets them live, lets them exist, lets them do their thing. So it's kind of cool that you can enchant a vehicle, which I think is kind of neat. And so you can kind of shut those off even if they're not crude, for example. But otherwise, the fact that it has flash makes it a great combat trick, so it is uncommon for a reason. I think this is a very good card. It's not like great. It's not like you're going to play like 3+ of these type things. I don't think you're going to draft them that highly, but I do think it is very powerful. It also gives you energy counters at instant speed thanks to the flash. So there is a lot of upside. It's really clear why this was an uncommon. So if you're using energy counters, it's 100% always. If you're not, I wouldn't go crazy with it, but I think it's probably on the better side of the blue limited half cards. Either Theorist is next. It's a blue and a generic mana for a common 1/3 Veldalken Rogue. And when either Theorist enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy counters. You may tap, pay an energy to scry 1. So this guy gives you a whole lot of energy kind of at a discount. Just for 2 mana, you're getting 3 energy counters. So you kind of got to look at the ratio of the mana to energy counter provision. And this seems to be definitely on the higher end of that curve. Now, of course, he's tapping to scry 1 and using an energy counter to do that. So in that way, like they powered him down. And it's really nice that the developers have the ability to take these very small minor effects and certainly spice up the card with them, but not break anything in the process, which is nice. Otherwise, if you're playing with energy counters, this guy gives you a lot for the money, basically, and that's a good thing. So that's kind of the only reason that you're playing with him. Not going to be any good in constructed, but certainly in limited, if you're sort of going the energy route, then this is the guy who you want to give you a lot of energy for very cheap. Next is either Trade Winds. It's a blue and a 2 generic mana common instant. This is a reprint. Return target permanent you control and target permanent you don't control to their owner's hands. This was always a fun trick. Again, we have Fabricate. We have lots of enter the battlefield abilities, including giving energy counters. So the ability to bounce your stuff and their stuff can... Ideally, of course, you can bounce a token of theirs while bouncing something with value for you. Again, it's at instant speed, so if they try to double block, you can just totally mess up combat. So this card's always been very, very good. Now, don't go crazy with the Cheese Whiz, because, it's good, but it's not like, oh my god, we have to run infinite, and... so I think it's a card you kind of want to run one of. You definitely want to play it in limited, usually as at least one. I don't like to really run 2 because sometimes they kind of get gunked up in your hand and it makes for really awkward situations. But in the right situations, of course, this card is bananas. In most situations, it's pretty good, and that's kind of where you want it to be. And any more than that, you're getting greedy, and that doesn't always end up very well. Next up is either Squall Ancient, a 2 blue 5 generic mana 6/6 rare Leviathan that flies, as Leviathans do. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get 3 energy counters for free, just for hanging out. And you may pay 8 energy, because 8 of those things next to each other looks great. Return all other creatures to their owner's hands, and you can only play that ability as a sorcery. So this guy gives you 3 energy every upkeep for free, and has this awesome other ability to return all other creatures, including ones like, the Either Theorist, who is providing you 3 energy counters just for coming into play. So this card is clearly a limited bomb. A 7 mana 6/6 flyer all by himself would be a limited bomb, but it has this ridiculous, awesome energy ability that if you have enough energy there, by the time you get to 7 mana, which is certainly possible, you can just fire it off as soon as you play him. That ability doesn't need to be, not summoning sick. It's just whenever you got 8 energy, cash it in at sorcery speed and bounce everything. So this card is incredibly powerful, very huge, great bomb rare, first pick, Windmill Slam. Love it, always play it, high five. Not going to be any good in constructed because things that cost that much have to do all sorts of craziness to impact that world. But this guy is made to be a limited monster. Ceremonious Rejection is sweet. It's 1 blue for an uncommon instant that counters target colorless spell. That is fantastic and is so long reaching. Like, I'm really curious if this card is actually going to make vintage play, because it counters a bunch of really relevant things. It is a blue card, so you can pitch it to Force of Will. You know, it's in the right color. You know, it's only 1 mana. It's as cheap as they could make it. It counters all the Eldrazi stuff. It counters stuff in Modern. It counters stuff in Standard. Like, this card is really awesome. So, you know, I always feel weird when I kind of get excited about sideboard cards, because it's kind of strange, you know, really jazzed about a card that's kind of going to sit in your sideboard and you may never even pull it out during a tournament if you don't face the right things. But that doesn't mean you can't get excited about having the right tools to fix the right problems, because it's awesome that this is one of those great kind of stopgap cards that after we've lived with the Eldrazi and we've lived with Emrakul and so on and so forth, if things kind of get too crazy, you have Ceremonious Rejection here to help you out, which is awesome. So this card seems like a multi-format all-star. Even if it lives in the sideboard, it's still an all-star. In Limited, however, it is going to in Limited, however, it's going to be good, and it's an artifact block, so you're probably going to have a lot of good options, and I would err on the side of at least trying one, you know, and just to see kind of how it works, because this is the type of card that, to me, I put in my sealed decks and I go, you know what, I have a good feeling about this one, because it's an artifact block. There's going to be a lot of colorless stuff that may be really scary, and I get to stop any of it for just 1 mana. For just keeping 1 mana open, I have that as an option. And so countering any artifact they play with 1 mana seems good. Of course, you can easily side it out, but I would try it in first. So 2 blue and 3 generic mana for Confiscation Coup. This is a rare sorcery that you choose target artifact or creature. You then get 4 energy counters. Then you may pay any amount of energy equal to that permanent's converted mana cost, and if you do, you gain control of it. So this is a control magic variant. It's kind of weird, it's kind of by the way, it's kind of going around the corner. It's still control magic. Now, it's no mind control, which was just the 5 mana, gain control in enchanted creature, but of course it also gets to target artifacts. So you can't forget that you're able to take vehicles, you're able to take other sweet equipment, or just other artifacts, period, with this card. But of course, I'm pretty sure you're going to be taking creatures most of the time, but it lets you hold back, lets you really use those energy counters. You get to take sort of whatever you want based on however many energy counters you can produce, which makes this card a bomb rare. So this card is fantastic. One of those cards that will pull you into blue, that if you open it in the second pack, you're going, oh man, I mean, it might be time to be looking at the blue cards, and maybe you're going in a different direction, but this is the kind of card that will kind of steer you back. So 100% positive, always play it in Limited, super great. Confiscation Coup. Curio Vendor, good old fashioned, right? You got your breads, you have your butters. You have curios, and you have your vendors. A blue and a generic mana for a 2/1 common Voldalkin. 2/1. Okay. A filler at best. And if you need it on the curve, like, these cards aren't just straight unplayable. I mean, this one isn't, the 04 was, but this one isn't just straight unplayable. It's just, it needs to be, like, it needs to fill a role. If you don't have many 2-drops, or you don't have any 2-drop creatures, like, you need 2-drops. Like, you just do. Even if they're just, literally blank 2/1s. Sometimes it's better to play them. So don't immediately throw this guy out. Give him some consideration, because if your curve doesn't have anything on the 2-drops, well, it's ready to vend for you. It's ready to stock that booth. Disappearing Act is 2 blue and a generic mana for an uncommon instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, and you counter target spell. Now, clearly, cancel is as cancel does. We have Scatter to the Winds, as I recall, that's the name of it, and it's a fantastic cancel. This one isn't necessarily bad, because really, I think the way that you use it is you obviously want to get value. You have a ton of stuff in this set that has entered the battlefield abilities, particularly energy things. So this isn't necessarily bad. Like, it's usually good to pick up something, and at worst, you're picking up a land. That's at worst. So this spell, to me, is very good. I wouldn't play a ton of it. I would definitely play at least one if I had it in my sealed pool, and sealed is better than in draft, because draft is often, very much sort of about tempo and what you play on curve and so on and so forth. Sealed, often you kind of, what's the bigger sort of monster play that people can run out there with, and this is perfect to stop it. So it's really good in sealed, but I think, this card isn't just like a bad counter spell. I think there's definitely some value here, even though clearly you would rather it just counter the spell, but I think you can really take advantage of it. Dramatic Reversal is next. It's a blue and a generic mana for a common instant that untaps all non-land permanents you control. It untaps all my elves and Pauper, for example, which is why I'm excited this is a common. Unfortunately, the actual sort of act of untapping all your creatures doesn't always, save you, as it were. It's usually not really worth a spell, because to get into those situations, you want it to be a nice combat trick, right? You want it to be a big surprise. But sometimes you're just worried more about kind of getting into the tempo and having any spell that proactively does something, whether it's proactively kind of bounces things, or it's another creature, or it's a removal spell, or it's, some sort of draw spell. Dramatic Reversal has a tough time kind of competing with any of those other effects. This to me it's weird, because I don't think we've seen an effect like this in a while. I could definitely see it being a good combat trick, but I personally feel like there's all the other effects and all the other spells that are going to be competing with it. I would rather play those over Dramatic Reversal. Era of Innovation is next. It is a blue and a generic mana for an uncommon enchantment that whenever an artifact or an artificer enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay a generic mana. And if you do, you get 2 energy counters. You may pay 6 energy counters and sacrifice it to draw 3 cards. Now remember, you don't have to sacrifice it to draw 3 cards when you have 6 energy counters. You could just keep this around and have it continue generating energy for you for a free generic mana after you play any artifact or any artificer. God, that's a hard word to remember. Regardless, it's basically free triggers and to get really cool bonuses, and you can always cash it in if you're kind of running low. This card seems pretty decent. Clearly, you got to put a lot of energy into it in order to get stuff out of it. You're going to have to pay extra mana to get that stuff going, but if you have enough enablers, I think it's certainly worth the price of admission. Experimental Aviator is 2 blue and 3 generic mana for an 0/3 uncommon human artificer. It has flying, and whenever it enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. So you kind of get like a 2/5 flyer for 5, which is sweet. And these are the type of cards why Disappearing Act even exists, because you want to pick it up, you want to blink it, with acrobatic maneuver, as I recall. This is a card he's just going to be a blocker, but ultimately he gave you 2 power that's evasive, 5 toughness that's evasive, and he's giving you value every time you're able to kind of pick him up, put him down, and there's plenty of ways to do that. We've already talked about either trade wins. This guy is all about the, kind of getting something going with tricks and, silly blink effects, which I think is awesome. So there's lots of value to be had. You just kind of have to dig for it a little bit. So I'm always happy to I think I would always be happy to put this guy in my limited decks. I think he's great. If you're playing blue, he's giving you this, think of it as like a 5 mana, 2/5 flyer, but except it's more versatile than that. And that's where the power comes from. Failed Inspection is next. It's a 2 blue, 2 generic mana instant common that counters target spell. You draw a card, then you discard a card. So you loot. Okay, that's fine. It's a little expensive, kind of slow. In sealed, I'm happy. In draft, not happy. So in sealed, I think it's okay. It's fine as one of your 22nd or 23rd cards. It is going to be able to, get some value, able to loot. Of course, it sucks when you don't have anything else in your hand, because then you have to draw and discard whatever you got. It is not a May. It's going to happen. So these types of counterspells that are 4 mana with some marginal upside, I'm always kind of leery of those things. They're okay. I wouldn't play it in draft, though. It's too much mana for not quite as much an effect as you need, and it's not worth sitting around holding 4 mana up all the time in order to make this do something. Gear Seeker Serpent is up next, one of my top 5 Pauper cards of the set. It is a 2 blue, 5 generic mana, common 5/6 Serpent that costs 1 generic mana less to cast for each artifact you control. For a blue and 5 generic mana, you may have this not be blocked this turn. It cannot be blocked this turn. So what we have here is Affinity for Artifacts, what essentially will end up being a 2 blue, 5/6 card. So would you pay a 2 blue creature that had 5/6 and an ability to give itself evasion? Pretty sweet. So clearly you have to have enough artifacts to make this thing, work, to make it worth it. So, in a world where we're playing Pauper and I can play with artifact lands, that's fantastic. In a world with Kaladesh, where you're having to cast those artifacts or get them out through servo tokens, it's not going to be quite that easy. I do think it's still a fine finisher. I wouldn't run a ton of them, but I do think in the right deck, maybe having multiples is the right call, because there's so much power to be found when you're able to get these things out for 3 or 4 mana. You know, of course, that's very magical, very Christmas, much land, just saying. I feel I would certainly start with 1, but I could see playing multiples if I have a high enough artifact count. Glimmer of Genius is next. It is a blue and 3 generic mana for an uncommon instant that says scry 2, then draw 2, and you get 2 energy counters. That is Val plus L plus U. That's value. It's fantastic. 3 vowels. 3 vowels? That's not right. Point is, it has 3 different things. 3 things that are awesome. Inspiration used to do only one of those things. It used to only draw 2 cards, and now you get to scry 2 first, so you get to see what you're getting and then see if you want them, and then you get to draw maybe some new ones, and you get 2 energy counters on top of it, and at instant speed. Whew, I am sold. I want to play every single one that I get. This card is good enough for Constructed, in my opinion, and I would not be surprised to see it in winning lists at some point in the future. Clintesque Crane is next. It is a blue and a generic mana for a uncommon 1/3 flying bird. And when it enters the battlefield, you may look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact from among them and put it into your hand, putting the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So that's really sweet. Like, you're not going to hit often, but it's a 2 mana 1/3 regardless. If you have some number of artifacts, which you should in an artifact block, I'm guessing you will, you know, it is certainly worth playing. It's a good early drop. It helps, you know, block their early stuff, and you know, so it's a 1/3. It's not going to be very aggressive, but it is evasive, and it can block other evasive creatures, which is awesome. And if it draws you an artifact, and that's just, then clearly, you know, it's doing its job. That's why it's there. So that's fantastic. I don't see this in Constructed. I think I've heard some rumblings of people liking it for Constructed. I don't think that's kind of real. But this does seem like a really cool, exciting type of card. Like, you know, these are the types of cards that you don't get to see enough, in my opinion, in terms of like the ones that kind of search through things and find things. And you know, there was this other card, you know, the collected company thing that happened, and I was, you know, was certainly surprised by how ridiculously good that card was. We're not saying this is collected company. I'm just explaining that, you know, looking through the top X and finding a thing is a good ability. So you're gonna be happy with Clintesque Crane in your limited decks. I wouldn't be playing a lot of them, maybe just 1. Maybe 2 if I got a ton of artifacts, but they'll be better in draft where you're able to craft your deck versus sealed where you're like, I hope the artifacts are good enough. High Tide Herman is next. It is a blue and 4 generic mana, 4/4 common crab as defender. And when it enters the battlefield, you get 4 energy counters out of this guy. You may pay 2 energy counters, and it can attack as though it didn't have defender this turn. So it is basically a 5 mana 4/4. It's a 5 mana 4/4 wall, essentially, that gives you 4 energy counters, which is pretty good. You can activate it, which is okay. But as a 5 mana guy, this is one of those, like, are you the energy deck? Are you looking for energy counters? You know, like when you start like kind of fanning through and like, does it make energy? Yes, it makes energy. Like, I think you're going to, at the pre-release, be able to have sort of these piles that say, you know, this makes energy and this doesn't. And you're able to kind of look at things based on that, because if you want to go sort of the energy way, then this is a guy that you think is reasonable or maybe playable, because if you're not, it's not. It's bad otherwise. So Insidious Will is next. It's a 2 blue, 2 generic mana rare instant that lets you do one of 3 things. Lets you counter a spell, choose new targets for target spell, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Fork, ladies and gentlemen, has gotten so bad that it has to live alongside 2 other effects in order to be okay. This is a fantastic casual card. I have heard some of my Commander playing buddies going nuts over this thing, because you want those crazy, you want all of the options in Commander. In Commander, everything crazy happens. So this is the perfect card to do exactly whatever it is you want, because if it matters, if you want to copy their spells, that's a thing. If you want to redirect to something else, that's very, you know, important. Or if you just want to counter something, that's very important. So, you know, this spell is super, super sweet. It is very much playable and limited just because you have all those options right there. So you copy their removal spell, or you just counter their guy, you know, or you want to choose you want to choose new targets. Well, no, you're going to kill your thing with your removal spell. Of course, at that point, you'd probably just copy the spell, but you understand what I'm saying. The point is, it gives you options. So rather than just counter a spell and then looting like the other one, this one gives you, you know, it lets you do with it what you want to do with it, which, you know, you add options, you have powerful magic cards. That's how it works. So Jangid Sentry, is a blue and a 2 generic mana, 2/3 uncommon Veldalkan soldier When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. You may tap and pay 2 energy counters. You may tap or untap target artifact or creature. So this guy is a 3-mana 2/3, which is fine. He's giving you energy counters. That's okay. It helps you tap down creatures, so that's very powerful. And this is the type of guy where you go, at High Tide Hermit, I'll be all right with that, because the ability to tap down creatures is far more powerful than the ability to turn High Tide Hermit into a 4/4 that can actually attack. But him providing 4 energy counters lets you use Jangid Sentry twice over beyond the first time, and that's very powerful, so that's very good. So this card to me is very much playable. It's got sort of the right stats, and I'd always want it in my blue decks. Long-finned Sky Whale. Sky Whales are sweet. 2 blue, 2 generic mana for an uncommon 4/3 whale. It has flying and can only block creatures with flying. So 4 mana, 4 power, evasive, yes please. Card is awesome. Who cares about the stupid drawback? I'm just going to be attacking. Like, oh, I can only block a thing? Oh, that's whatever. Okay, sweet. I'm going to red zone. Thanks. Like, that's what you want this card to do. You want to turn it sideways. I'm going to play every single copy. There's a reason it's uncommon. Oh, God. I want all the Sky Whales. I want to just ride the Sky Whales to victory. That's what I want to do. I want a big, huge chorus of Sky Whales. We're going to wreck it. Just wreck it. Like Ralph. Malfunction is next, a blue and 3 generic mana for a common aura that enchants an artifact or a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you tap that permanent, and when the enchanted permanent does not untap during its controller's untap step. It's good old-fashioned blue removal. Yes, you have to pay more for it. However, it can still shut down an artifact. That's important. So, it's the blue pacifism-esque type effect. These cards are always very playable because you always want to lock down their creatures or their artifacts, depending on what it is. This to me, it's a little expensive, but it is a removal spell. It's blue removal, and you will always play it in your blue decks. Metallurgic Summonings is next, and it is a 2 blue, 3 generic mana mythic enchantment. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create an XX colorless construct artifact creature token, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. And then you may pay, if you'd like, 2 blue and 3 generic mana and exile it to return all instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. You may activate this ability only if you control 6 or more artifacts. What this kind of says to me is a whole bunch of words that this is bad and limited. This is good in casual constructed, maybe good in actual constructed. I could certainly see a control deck winning with this type of card right here. And into your turn, do the scry 2, draw 2, 2 energy counters, whatever, make a 4/4. That seems fine, really. This is the type of card that creates an end game for that type of deck. This is the type of card that you want to pay 5 mana to exile it and get back all your sweet instants and sorceries, because you're in constructed and you're able to put your deck together that way. You just don't have enough spells and limited to make this really worth it. Even the ability, at that point you've put in 10 mana to get back 2 cards or something. It's not worth the amount of investment and reach for that. Even if you're drafting, it's tough, because instants and sorceries are not really what win limited games, and trying to build your deck around 1 card is usually a way to lose those games. Minister of Inquiries is next. It is a 1 blue uncommon 1/2 Veldalken Advisor. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. You may tap and pay 1 energy counter. Target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. So this is our Millstone variant. Again, you have the ability to have energy counters that are produced. There's more energy counters produced than the mana that you put into them. That's also, that's very important to note. It is just 1 blue mana. It is a 1/2 instead of a 1/1. That's appreciated. And I do think that this is the type of card that you're able to draft multiples of. You're able to draft around it, and multiples of this card, going crazy, and you're making energy counters, and you got your crabs out there that are doing all the blocking duty as a 4/4. You'd be surprised. It doesn't take a ton of activations to kill somebody, but you got to be able to, that's got to be sort of laser point. This is not for sealed. This is for draft, because you can probably get this card late because you're kind of the only person doing the mill thing, and that's where you can take advantage of it. Otherwise, this card is basically unplayable. So I would not play it in sealed by any chance. Even just as a 1 mana 1/2, it's not good enough. It does have some real cool implications in draft, which I think is why it's really super neat. Nimble Innovator is next. A 1 blue 3 generic mana 3/3. It is a common Veldalken Artificer, and when Nimble Innovator enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So a 4 mana 2/2 that draws a card. A 4 mana 2/2 that replaces itself. That's good. It's not amazing, but it's good. And then it's also an artificer. And there's, man, that's a weird word, because I always said it's artificer, but that's incorrect. The artificer thing is kind of funny because there's multiple cards that trigger off of artificers existing, even equipment that we'll take a look at later. So that's cool. So there is a factor that this card matters because it's an artificer. That's sweet. It replaces itself. That's fine. It's a 4-mana 2/2, not as exciting. So you know that ultimately it's decent. It's one of those cards that like I'll play it and I'll be happy to play it, and I will consider it sort of like, you know, the mid-range creature that I have. It's a 4-drop dude. It's nothing to write home about, nothing to draft early, but it's a card that can live in your decks and you'll be okay with it. You won't love it, but it'll do what you kind of want it to do for you. And if you're able to do things like blink it, you're able to get some value out of it. So Padim, Consul of Innovation, is a blue and 3 generic mana 1/4, a rare Veldalken Artificer, a rare legendary Veldalken Artificer. Ugh. I'm going to have to just, you know, give myself crap over this entire review. Anyway, artifacts you control have hexproof. Heyo, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, you draw a card. That's awesome. This card is totally sweet. I want to be able to abuse this card because I like to draw cards. So, you know, the fact that your other artifacts have hexproof is awesome. That's so cool. It's just like another, you know, it's sweet because it works together. It's sweet because it gives it a bonus that you didn't really have to reach for. You didn't have to use another card to give your artifacts hexproof. You know, it's funny to me, we live in an era these days where you kind of get your chocolate with the peanut butter already slabbed on top. Like, it didn't really need to have artifacts you control have hexproof, but now they do. And because they do, they're that much more difficult to remove. So now you have to deal with with Padim here instead of dealing with all of the artifacts, which I think is super cool. And of course, if you can get this advantage, it's very good. And the best part about it is that if you don't have the, you know, artifact with the highest converted mana cost, there's no downside. You're not losing anything. In fact, your other artifacts still have hexproof, and that's still usually good enough because, you know, you have vehicles and things that can get destroyed by creature removal, and they won't be when this guy's out. So that's super sweet. Paradoxical Outcome, a blue and 3 generic mana rare instant. You return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hands. Draw a card for each return to your hand this way. Are they really talking about this in Vintage? Because I heard some rumblings about it, and I'm like, well, yeah, you kind of pick up all your Moxen, and then you draw a bunch of cards, and you play your free stuff, and you certainly have enough cheap, powerful things that you can kind of go off and go crazy. So maybe it's weird to have a card that's like, yeah, it has to be the most powerful and broken format in Magic for this card to really do what you want it to do. So that's really strange. Otherwise, as you can tell, as we've talked about, there's just so many sweet enter the battlefield abilities at this point that this type of card instantly at the end of their turn will let you get all of them again. Will save your creatures from mass removal or from a removal spell. So this card has a lot of versatility. This card is very, very powerful. The question really is just when you want to fire it off, because it goes well with almost every creature that we've looked at. Most of them have a really sweet ability that if you get to play them again, then that's fantastic. Now, clearly, you don't get to play the tokens again, but because, you know, you couldn't pick up the tokens anyway, it doesn't matter now, does it? So this card is super sweet. I'm expecting it to be very good in limited, very good in casual constructed just for funsies, and maybe Vintage. It sounds weird, but, you know, if anybody's going to abuse it, the people with Moxen can. Revolutionary Rebuff. It is revolutionary, let me tell you. A revolutionary rebuff is a blue and a generic mana for a common instant that counters target non-artifact spell unless its controller pays 2 generic mana. That's so close to Mana Leak, but not Mana Leak, because Mana Leak is bad, and Mana Leak kind of controls a format. It's weird, but when it's there, it kind of controls the format. Everything bows down to what Mana Leak can do and control the early game, and particularly when Wizards gave it an amazing one-drop in the form of Delver of Secrets, you really got to see Mana Leak control a meta game. And when Mana Leak was reprinted, it was just, ooh, it just hurt. So like when Mana Leak was back and the Titans were back, it was just, there was lots of sadness. But this card is the closest they've come in a while to printing something like that. And I could definitely see this seen a lot of play. This seen a lot of high-level constructed play. This is, given their Mana Leak-esque type abilities, there's not a lot of artifacts right now that I think are worrying people to the point where they wouldn't want to play this, and there's certainly enough non-artifact spells that are powerful enough that you could certainly get some value out of this card. So we'll see. I'm kind of dubious. Ultimately, Mana Leak is a repressive type spell. It does put a damper on the format. There's only certain things you can do when you know that Mana Leak kind of exists, and it often keeps expensive spells out of standard because no one, like when you're trying to resolve your Primeval Titan 6-drop dude, and they're like, nope, well, when Cavern and Souls exists, that's awesome. When it doesn't, this type of spell can keep those types of cards out of constructed. In limited, it's okay because it's non-artifact. It is an artifact block. There's going to be plenty of artifacts anyway. My initial impression is that I would probably skip it because it's super conditional, and I feel like it would do more harm for me trying to keep 2 mana up to proactively counter something, and then it ends up being an artifact, and then I kind of look silly versus not. So this to me is a pass in limited, but I could definitely see it in constructed, and I could definitely see it impacting constructed in what is hopefully not bad ways moving forward. So Healys Artistry is next. This is I believe the Buy a Box promo or the Game Day promo. It's a promo. The point is, it is a 6 mana. It's a 2 blue, 4 generic mana rare sorcery that you may choose one or both. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact, or create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. In other words, it's amazing. This card is fan-freaking-tastic. It's sweet. It does everything you want it to do. You can abuse it like in 7 different ways, just making multiple copies of your sweet artifacts. This spell is good. This spell is great. It's fantastic in casual construct. I think Commander's going to love this stuff. I don't see, because we don't have an artifact creature kind of on the lines of like, Wormcoil Engine. Like, we've got a whole bunch of Gear Hulks that are sweet, but I don't really know if any of them in a lot of multiples is great. Maybe the red one, but the red one's the Punisher one. We'll get to it. The point is, a big 6 mana sorcery like this to me just wasn't meant for constructed as much as it was, I think, meant to be played and have fun with, because this spell is a ton of fun. It's going to be an absolute blast in Commander, and I don't see it going any further than that, but man, is it a super fun time. So Healys Artistry is awesome. Select for Inspection is a 1 blue common instant that returns target tapped creature to its owner's hand, and then you scry 1. Now, some people notice, like, why didn't you mention this in the Pauper review? And I was like, because Unsummon exists, because Vapor Snag exists. Vapor Snag is just better, in my opinion. Vapor Snag is the unsummon and they lose a life. And so that's awesome. Like, yeah, you get to scry 1 with this, but they have to be a tapped creature. Sometimes that really matters. Like, you have to get rid of blockers, and this doesn't let you get rid of a blocker, which means it's not very good. However, this to me is a little bit different, mainly because you can return your tapped creature, of course, if you like, if it kind of gets into like if they play a combat trick and you're like, oh, I think I'll just pick that back up, thank you. And there's plenty of end of the battlefield abilities, you can take advantage of that. Or, of course, at the end of their turn, you get to bounce their really expensive thing, so their next turn they'll have to spend it casting that thing, and then, you kind of get out of that. But usually if they're attacking, they have something back that they're okay, that they're fine with attacking with. So they attack with a big flyer, and they have some big monster down there that's holding up the ground. Otherwise, well, you want to bounce the big monster that's holding up the ground. You don't want to bounce the thing that's attacking you. Now, on that flip side, you could say that, at that point you could attack all in, and whenever he blocks with his monster, you could then bounce with this. But that to me is optimal type scenarios, and it also involves you using this card to do that, to replay your guy, and only if you're getting value out of it does it really help. So that to me is pretty marginal. So I would more than likely not want to play this type of card because that drawback is pretty significant. Shrewd Negotiation. It's a blue and 4 generic mana uncommon sorcery. You exchange control of target artifact you control and target artifact or creature you don't control. That is huge. That is huge. Switcheroo is a card, and that's fine. You're switching creature for creature, but no, now I can give you a non-creature artifact. I can give you any artifact on my side for your best creature. That is really powerful. And even if it's an artifact creature for your best artifact creature or whatever, who cares? You're basically swapping 2 different types, or you're swapping your 1 type for their 2 different types. So that gives you flexibility, which gives you power, which means this card is insanely sweet. And I expect it to see infinite play in all my limited decks, and I definitely want to see it, and I definitely want to play it. And I think it's one of the best blue uncommons for that use. So Shrewd Negotiation is sweet. It's probably not good enough for constructed. I don't expect it, but even in limited or even in casual formats, I could definitely see this being totally awesome, because at that point you can do things like give them a mana rock and take their worm coil engine, for example, which would be totally sweet. Tezzeret's Ambition is 2 blue, 3 generic mana, a common sorcery that draws 3 cards, and if you control no artifacts, you discard a card. So I made this meme on Twitter, and it said, you remember when 2 blue and 3 generic mana used to draw you 4 cards? Pepperidge Farm remembers. I really do. But what we have here is Tezzeret's Ambition, and instead of drawing 4 cards, we're drawing 3 cards, and then we're getting -1 card if we don't control an artifact. So it's kind of a kick in the junk. There's not a lot of card draw. There's the sweet instant card draw that we talked about earlier. This one, not quite as good. Not a card I really want to run if I don't have to, because sometimes you're going to get kicked in the junk and you play it with no artifacts and you're paying 5 mana to draw 2, and that's not a really good rate at all. And at that point you have to start saying, like, what other cards could I be playing that are better than this thing? And I'm guessing a lot of them. Thriving Turtle is next. It is a 1 blue 0/3 common turtle. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters, and when it attacks, you may pay 2 energy counters, and if you do, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So basically, it's a 1/4 for 1 mana, which is kind of sweet, honestly. Normally, they make these cost 2 mana, but because now it has to be attacking, and now you have to use energy counters, they're kind of able to justify a creature that is above the curve, but they can use another kind of knob to make it fair. That's why I love energy counters, and that's why I think Wizards, really was able to show the flexibility of energy counters, and I'm really excited to see what they do in either Revolt as a result. But Thriving Turtle itself, not good. You have to be digging real deep in the give me anything that makes energy cards before Thriving Turtle is like where you go with that. You know what I'm saying? So Thriving Turtle, not so good. I don't like that card. But Torrential Gearhulk, I do like, even if I misread it, because I talked about it in another video. However, it is a 2 blue 4 generic mana 5/6 mythic artifact construct. It has flash. It is an artifact creature. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you may cast target card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card will be put into your graveyard this turn, you exile it instead. So it is only instants. That was the thing. I missed that earlier. I thought it was sorceries, for instance, at which point I was like, whew. I mean, like, it's kind of nuts what you could do when you're able to cast free sorceries. Casting free instants, not quite as good. Now, clearly, this card is playable. It's totally sweet. Even if it's just a 6 mana 5/6 flash guy, that's fine. You should be able to abuse it most of the time. By the time you get to turn 6, you've probably played an instant of some sort. So you kind of get it for free, and because it has flash, even if it's just a combat trick, you'll still get it for free, so that's really cool. So this is a bomb. Don't get me wrong. It's just not one of the largest bombs, but it's a super sweet card. Constructed, maybe. Like, the fact that it only hits instants is a pretty big damper. I could still see play, but I think its chances and my excitement for it went down quite a bit when I realized it was only instants. Veldalken Blademaster is next. It is a blue and a 2 generic mana for a 2/3 common Veldalken soldier, and it has prowess. So a 3 mana 2/3 with prowess, that's fantastic, because like prowess is that awesome ability that says, what if they have it? Or do they got it? Now for me, the way I always say, you make them have it. Every time, you make them have it. However, when you're playing someone else and they have a 3/3 and you have Veldalken Blademaster and you got to do it confidently. You just got to turn that guy sideways. And you just look him just dead in the eye. Now, some of them will call it, and there's not much you can do about that. But most of them, in my experience anyway, will happily take 2 damage and not risk their 3/3 dying, and you having an instant in that regard, versus, just taking that risk, basically. So sometimes they'll call you on it, sometimes they won't, but I like to make them have it. I like to run it in there and confidently turn my dude sideways, regardless of whether I have it or I don't have it. And Veldalken Blademaster is the perfect creature for that. Weldfast Wingsmith, Weldfast, huh? Is a blue and 3 generic mana 3/3 common human artificer. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gains flying until end of turn. So it's a hill giant that gains flying sometimes, but it still gains evasive an evasive ability, which is good. So you really want it to trigger, because a 3/3 flyer for 4 mana is obviously fantastic. You're not going to get it all the time, so it's not a card I value super highly. If you have lots of artifacts in your deck, it gets a lot more playable. So the amount of artifacts in your deck are kind of going to determine how playable this card is. If you don't have a lot of artifacts, this is just like a hill giant, and there's nothing wrong with that as a 4 mana 3/3, but there's often better options. Windrake is here. Windrake, baby, woohoo! It's a blue and 2 generic mana for a common 2/2 Drake that flies. This, ladies and gentlemen, has been a classic Magic card that's been in Magic for a very long time. I've spoken about it multiple times. It is it's one of those kind of benchmarks, like a hill giant, for example, like I just spoke about. A Windrake, there's lots of Windrakes that aren't named Windrake. There are 3 mana 2/2 flyers. Eldrazi Sky Spawner is the best Windrake ever because it makes a 2/1 and a 1/1. So Windrake is a classic because it is one of the most playable classic cards in Magic. It's great. It's always been good, and I would suggest that you always pick it and you always play it because Windrake is awesome. And that wraps up all of the blue cards for Kaladesh. I want to thank you guys for being here and hanging out with me while we go through every single card in the set. It has been interesting as a solo endeavor, but not too bad, I guess. You guys let me know in the comments below. Please subscribe if you like this, you want to see more. And until next time, Magic players, this is Evan Irwin, tapping the cards so you don't have to.